you this week?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm great. I would love to welcome our listeners to, and our, I guess, viewers as well, to our podcast From the Ground Up, our podcast about autism, faith, and family. We are on magic episode, lucky number 13.
Wow.
I know, it's
They've
crazy.
gone by fast, haven't they?
They have. I would love to encourage our viewers and listeners, if they have not listened or watched any of our previous podcasts, to pull those up. I know we had the opportunity to talk to your beautiful wife, Julie, last week, and she just had so many little gems and tidbits that she shared with us. So I'm so thankful for her time and her heart that she shared. So
yeah, if you missed last week, make sure and go back and see it, and you will know immediately why I married her 37 years ago and how we've stayed married over those last 37 years. So please take a look. I thought she really opened. I've got to compliment my wife. She really opened up her heart and really shared. And I think it's critical as parents that are on the same path that you have to have an understanding that you're feeling the same thing that a lot of other people are feeling, that you're not alone in how you feel.
Yes. And sometimes just hearing that is just comfort. So I'm so thankful for Julie for opening her heart and sharing her experiences with our listeners. This week, we have 3 different areas we want to cover. First, we're going to talk a little bit from an autism perspective as a board certified behavior analyst, AKA BCBA. I know all of the questions that families should ask providers before they start their child in ABA therapy and ABA treatment. And that's actually been a hot topic I've seen on a lot of parent groups and Facebook groups, social media that I'm in. And so I thought it'd be really important for us to visit that and dive into some of those questions and answers. And then, Scott, I know you're going to talk about life and plan versus purpose and how those kind of differ through the Christian perspective. And finally, we're going to use some sports, as we both know we are big sports fans, and talk about how it's so important for husbands and wives, spouses, caregivers to all be on the same team when it comes to the work, to the programming and working with their child through their journey. So I'm excited about what we have to talk about tonight.
So Megan, let's say that I'm a parent that's out there. I'm new to this path, trying to figure everything out. Somebody said, hey, you should try BCA or behavioral therapy amongst all the other therapies that you've been hearing about out there. What are some of the things that somebody needs to know about behavioral therapy before maybe starting down that path?
Yeah, absolutely. So ABA therapy is one of the most research-based interventions with autism and is one of the most effective. I've talked about in some of our previous podcasts about the National Standards Project and some of the most evidence-based effective interventions for kids with autism. And those interventions are really based on a behavioral model. And so that's obviously why I am in this field. I've seen it work. I've seen it be successful for families. And so it sometimes gets a bad rap because people, when they think behavior therapy, they think, oh, well, that's gonna, punishing, it's gonna be harmful to my child. That's what they do to train animals. It's not that at all. And that's why I want to talk about some questions that might be important for families to ask when they're looking and navigating this path. I know it's one of those interventions that families really try hard to get their kids in when they've done their research and see what's effective. And finding a good quality ABA provider is so important because it's going to make the difference on your child's progress. It's going to make the difference and the comfort level as you as a parent. I mean, you're dropping your child off. Typically, we have 2 different models. We have in-home models, but we also have clinic-based. And if you opt for a clinic-based model for your child, you're going to be dropping that child off to them for 35 to 40 hours a week if they're in an intensive program. Yes. And when your child's not able to verbalize wants, needs, feelings, emotions, you want to make sure that you trust that person that you're dropping your child off to. So I think that's just diving into those questions of what do I even ask is really important.
Sure. Well, and I know from our standpoint, not every behavioral therapist is the same. So you can't just make a blanket statement. There's some general statements you can make, but you really need to know that person. And I think you and I would both agree, the first piece of advice is trust your gut. And in all of this, as we go through this and point these things out, as a mom or as a caregiver, as a dad, you've got to trust your gut in some of this and believe that you're going to go a long way on this.
Absolutely. One of the things I always tell parents when I'm first talking with them and helping them navigate these steps is you are your child's subject matter expert. Yes. I may be a BCBA and I'm the expert when it comes to ABA therapy and intervention, but you know your child better than I do. And so when you're interviewing different providers and things like that, that's something to ask them. Who's going to be working with my child, and how often are they going to see? The BCBA is so if I like to use the medical model because it's really easy for people to relate to. So if you think about, you go to the doctor, you see the doctor, right? You see the physician, and that physician creates your program or diagnoses you, but also provides the treatment that you're going to be receiving, whether that be medication or physical therapy or something like that. Then you have the nurse that kind of helps implement those things. They get you all of the items and materials that you need to implement that treatment that the physician has written up. And so that's what a BCBA does. A BCBA is the person that's going to write your child's treatment plan. They're going to assess that child's skill sets, their needs, their abilities, and they're going to write a program to address that. And then they're going to have an RBT, which stands for Registered Behavior Technician, or a behavior technician sometimes is also, as they're known, to implement those programs. So your child's more than likely going to be spending the vast majority of their time with that direct care therapist, the RBT or BT. And then the BCBA is going to be overseeing that program. BCBA should be seeing your child multiple times a week, 10 to 20% of their hours that they've been prescribed. So if your child is getting 35 hours a week of treatment, the BCBA should really be seeing your child anywhere from 3 to 5 hours a week. If that's not happening, that's something you might want to inquire a little bit more about. Of why is this not happening? Why is the BCBA not seeing my child this much? Because that person is critical in driving that treatment and driving that progress for your child forward. But that seeing that BCBA can be face-to-face. It can also be via telehealth. So I know if anything good came out of COVID, it came the telehealth piece of allowing access to care for families of kids that maybe didn't have access to services. So
yeah, we had that for a long time. Megan, you were in a different state and were able to give the services that we needed to Colby just by having an iPad in the room or a laptop in the room, being able to see exactly what was going on. So I can testify that it does work from a distance. So.
Yep. As long as you've got a really great quality RBT that is working with them and able to implement those things the BCBA is asking them to do. So
let me ask this. Do you want to talk about qualifications for a BCBA? Because I think people might not really understand just the level of training that is required to be a BCBA and what that process looks like, so that you can put that person on the hierarchy of medical providers.
Absolutely. So BCBA's board certified behavior analysts, in order to receive that certification, they have to have a master's degree in a specific field. It can be psychology, it can be education. And then in addition to that master's degree, they have an additional level of coursework that they have to take. And then once they take that coursework, then they also have to complete it's now 2,000 hours. It was 1,500 when I was going through the certification process. So they do the coursework, and then they have 2,000 hours of supervised field work, or they can do an intensive practicum, which is basically allows them a little bit more interaction with the supervising BCBA. So somebody that's already been already certified oversees them for 2,000 hours while they continue down that path. Once the coursework is completed and that 2,000 hours has been completed, then they sit for a board certification exam. And that board certification exam, the pass rate, I think the last time I checked was in the 80s. So it's a pretty intense exam. Mm-hmm. And so once that happens, then once they're certified, they then cannot go and supervise other new BCBAs. They have to have some additional support within the first couple of years of their training to oversee other future BCBAs. So it's a pretty intensive program. It's above a master's degree and additional education in direct training.
Yeah, it requires a lot of work, because I have a daughter that's about to go wrap up her training, and it's pretty intense. It's a lot of work. You just understand this: if you're dealing with a BCBA, they're well educated, they're well trained, and they are people that are pretty dedicated to the cause, because they wouldn't go through the hoops required to be a BCBA if it wasn't something that was really important to them. So I've yet to meet a BCBA that wasn't dedicated to the cause.
I'm very proud of our field, and we're very few and far between, in all honesty. I mean,
Yes.
we've grown tremendously in the last 10 years, but there's still such a need in a lot of rural areas across the country. So that's where that telehealth benefit comes into play. I think another important thing for BCBAs to ask when they're looking for different treatments for their child is to just ask, what does the parent involvement look like for me? How am I going to be involved in my child's program? Because when we are working with kids and we're working on behaviors, it's so important for us to make sure that mom and dad are on the same page as the treating providers. If parents are doing something that's the exact opposite of the BCBA and the programming, they're not gonna jive, right? It's like taking, a cholesterol lowering medication, but then not eating the way that the doctor prescribes. So making sure that parents and the treating providers are all on the same page is very important. And if you're looking at a program for your child that is a good quality program, they're going to want your involvement. They're going to want you there. If you're saying, okay, well, can I come observe my child at the clinic? And they're like, oh, no, that's not really something we do. That should be a red flag. Because if they're transparent in that treatment and they're wanting you involved, you should be there. They should say, yeah, sure, come. We want you here every day if you can be here. Obviously, there's sometimes things when we're getting kids used to programming and used to environments, it's a little bit easier to do when parents are not there. But parents need to be involved, and they need to feel comfortable and confident that if they want to come in and observe their child, they have the ability to do that. Another good question, I think, is to ask, what types of trainings do they provide for their direct care staff? It's very important that the direct care staff are trained in a variety of areas, because they're working with children that don't necessarily have the verbal communication. They don't have maybe the personal care needs that they should have to be able to care for themselves. So it's really important. And when you're asking these questions, it helps you understand the provider, helps you build that communication, helps you understand their thought process and the method behind their program or their organization. Some of the most common trainings that we would see RBTs having is obviously CPR training, Medicaid, Medicare fraud. That's sometimes determined based on funding sources, but also based on the state that the services are happening in. HIPAA training, because even though ABA clinics sometimes look like daycares, they are a medical facility and they're required to follow HIPAA and make sure that everybody understands HIPAA and the importance of those parameters that have been put into place. They usually have child abuse neglect training that they're required to have. And then also what we call a safety care training. So there's lots of different ones out there. There's one that's called CPI, which is crisis prevention intervention. It's used a lot in schools. There's safety care. Those are all specific trainings that are created to help reduce problem behaviors. And in the event we do have a child that maybe has escalated and they're not being safe and they need help protecting their own bodies or protecting others, there are specialized trainings that staff should be put through to make sure that should they have to do that, they know how to do it properly to keep the child safe and the staff safe. I'm a very big believer in we don't go what I call hands-on, or we don't put our hands on a child unless they are putting themselves at danger or they're going to put somebody else at danger. And so that's something really important for parents to ask. What does that training look like? Who is trained to do it? Is it a special team of people? Is it the whole staff? Do they even offer that training? Because that can also tell you the hierarchy of the level of protection and also the level of concern that they have for your child and your child's safety. If that's something that's a priority to them, that's a good thing for sure. And then I think sometimes, like I had just mentioned, we sometimes see ABA clinics, and when we do the tours and we do the walkthroughs, it looks like a daycare. And I say that because a lot of the approaches that are going on are very naturalistic. And naturalistic means we teach in the natural setting. So instead of having a child sit at a desk or sit at a table and implement different goals, we're doing it while we're playing. And research shows that kids learn and play much more quickly than they do sitting at a table or a desk. And so asking the treating provider, the BCBA, what is my child's program going to look like the first few weeks so that you have an idea? That should look like the child is going to be what we call pairing. So they're going to be spending a lot of time engaging in preferred activities and preferred tasks with new people. And so the RBTs and the BTs are building that relationship with that child. They're building that trust. They're building that rapport. And so the first few weeks of your child's treatment, if you're like, all they do is play all day, that's a good thing. That's a good thing, because you're not going to want to go work for somebody that doesn't have fun, right? As a child, you want to go here, I want to go have fun, I want to play. And once we get that rapport built, guess it's a lot easier for us to have them do things that may be a little bit more difficult or a bit more challenging for them. Just as an employer, I want to go work for somebody who's fun, who appreciates me, who enjoys me being there. I like going there. It's going to make my job a lot easier than if I go in and they're just asking me to do all these things all the time and just harping on me. So take comfort in, if it looks like just play the first few weeks, that's okay. That's a good thing. So,
well, and I can talk a little bit about Colby's experience, because that's the way it looked like to us. It's okay when we're spending all this money, because at that time we didn't have any insurance. We were like, okay, when's something going to happen here, right? I mean, let's be real. But what we came to understand is, for Colby, everything was about motivation. And the therapist, it's going to take them some time to really understand what motivates that child, what makes that child want to do what they're being asked to do. Because for Colby, if he wasn't motivated to do it, you weren't going to get anything out of him. Okay. And to this day, he's that way. Okay. He's 21 years old, and you got to know what lights his fire, if you will. And so the therapist, and you could probably testify to this, the therapist is really trying to figure that out, as well as getting that environment, getting that relationship, so that child wants to work with the therapist. It probably takes a couple of weeks to do that. So be prepared. There's going to be a little bit of foundation setting in the relationship before you can go on and do a whole lot of other stuff. That's part of the process. That's to be expected.
Absolutely. Yep. And I think even parents will be like, well, they like to do this at home. Why don't they do it here? Well, because at home they get to do it with you, mom, and you're a mom, you're a highly preferred person. It's more about mom's attention than it is about the item or object, right? Or the toy. And so we're really working hard to we're really working hard to build that same relationship with the child, so that when they come and they see us, they don't run the other direction, because we're always asking them to do hard things. I have the top 10 questions I've created for ABA providers for parents they can download it. And I give the question, but I also going to give an answer of what would be a good answer or response from those providers. I think it's important, just as any relationship, when you're going to be working with somebody very intensely for an extended period of time, and you're going to be sending your child there for a lot of their time, to know that person, to interview them. And so I will add that link that this can be downloaded in our show notes, but it's also on my Hopper Consulting Facebook page and also on my website. So I would encourage parents to just download that, and you can come up with your own questions, obviously, but it helps get the juices flowing and the thoughts going of like, okay, these are the things I need to be asking or looking into as I'm looking at ABA providers for my child. So,
and Megan, I know that people may have missed some previous shows. I think it's important for everybody to know you're trying to build a really content-rich web page, so that people that are on those in this first stage of, okay, what do I do now? There's a lot of checklists, a lot of documents that they can download to be a part of that binder we've talked about. You've got to have kind of a treatment binder where you keep all your notes, you keep all your information, and it will help you to start on that path. So please, if you haven't done so already, go to the website, take a few minutes, download some of those documents. They're there for you. There's no charge for any of that. So
absolutely. My goal is to help make that journey a lot easier for those families, and just get the wheels turning and thinking about questions and things they may not even know they need. I also have a couple blog posts about treatments for children and what's most effective as well, that would be helpful for parents to dive into in the early steps as well. So Scott, I think it's really important for parents to interview the ABA provider that they're going to be sending their child to. Just like any relationship, it's really important to know that person. They're going to be spending a lot of time with your child. And so these questions are some really great starting points to help parents start to generate and think about, what do I need to know? What types of things do I need to ask? And so I hope that they're beneficial for families. And I would love to hear questions that maybe parents have asked that aren't on the list as well. Just again, to build that community of support for families on this journey.
Say, if you've got questions, we've got answers. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll be happy to address any question you have on the show. And you've got an expert right here, so take a minute and send us an email if you like. We'd be happy to take any topic. So have at it.
Absolutely.
Speaking of topics, I think we've got a tough one coming up, Megan.
So, Scott, let me hand it over to you. This week, we're going to talk about plan versus purpose and what really is the difference of those two things as we talk about our journeys, the autism journey, but also journey of life. So,
Well, I think we were joking around a second ago, but just the whole idea that I'm about to take on maybe one of the most difficult topics in Christianity. What is God's role in our life and what can we expect from him? And we're going to have a little slight coffee conversation here. So, and I want to talk about it a little bit from my own struggle as I was going through a faith crisis when we were handed down Colby's diagnosis, as well as what I see on autism boards and what I think some parents are really struggling with. And part of it just goes back to some basic challenges we have with Christianity and how it's developed over the millennia. We've got one part of Christianity that's Calvinism, which basically believes that God preordains everything. He's basically got this very specific plan for your life, and all you have to do is just try to figure out what that plan is and follow that plan, versus a school of thought called Arminianism, which is more that God's got this overarching idea that he's trying to accomplish in this world, and you still have a lot of room to make decisions. And of those two, I tend to be more on the idea of God has an overarching plan, but he doesn't have he doesn't have a blueprint for our lives. He doesn't have a rule book for our lives. He doesn't have this very specific, detailed plan. He has more of an overarching plan for salvation. He has a plan for where he's wanting the world to go. One of the things I think about is I've got a picture frame of me holding my two daughters, and it's got the verse out of Jeremiah that says, "For I know the plans I have for you." And I think a lot of people are real familiar with that. And the thinking is when you see it in a picture frame and you see your children, it's like God's got this providential hand over their lives. But that's really not necessarily what the Bible says. The verse in Jeremiah is talking about, he's talking to the nation of Israel. He's talking about, I have a plan for you as a nation as to what I'm going to be accomplishing through you. Not necessarily these specific plans that he has for you as an individual. And what makes me want to talk about this is a post that I saw one time on a discussion board, that asked the question, what God do I pray to? The one that created my son this way, or the one that's not, or the one that's not providing the miracle that I want to have? And I think it's real important that we understand that God's plan does not include your child being autistic. God does not want bad things to happen to good people. But God does not necessarily have complete control over all of the earth. In fact, I think when I read the Bible, it talks about there being a battle. There's spiritual warfare. There's angels and demons at battle in this world. And behind the scenes, that there's these things that are happening. And God chooses to give us free will. He loves us, and he's looking for us to love him. But if God chose us already to love him, we would have no free will in that. So God gives us the agency to make these choices. So we can't necessarily look at God as having this detailed plan for our life. However, I think the Bible is very clear that he has a purpose for us. In Romans 8:28, it says, all things work for good for those who love the Lord. Now, a lot of people like to stop right there and just leave it at that. But let's be real. There's some additional part of that scripture. And it says, and are called according to his purpose. What I think that scripture means is, if we choose to live our lives according to his purpose, which is his purpose is to be glorified. And our job is to follow along with that purpose, is to glorify him. That when that happens, regardless of what happens to us, we will be fulfilling that purpose, whether we are blessed, whether we are in a very challenging time. If we're living our life according to his purpose, he's being glorified. And that means that as we take on this challenge of autism, we have to realize there's purpose in what we're doing, but it's not necessarily a part of God's plan. And I just want to encourage you as a parent to think that way. The other thing that sticks out is, I know people that have said, well, this must be God's will that your child be in this situation. This is what God's will was. I don't think that God's will is for anything bad to happen in our lives. In fact, in the Lord's Prayer, we're called to pray. If we're going to use that as our model for prayer, we're called to pray that God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The corollary to that thought is it's possible that there's things on this earth that aren't in accordance with God's will, that God's will in heaven is not necessarily the same thing that's happening on this earth at this time. And our job is to pray so that may take place. And that we're here to follow that will and to try to bring the earth to the point where it's following God's will, but that's not necessarily its natural state. So, as we struggle through this, we talked a little bit about what I refer to as bookstore Christianity that likes to put a pretty bow on everything and hand it to you. These are not necessarily pretty topics, but if you'll follow these principles that I'm talking about, it may help you through a little bit of a faith crisis right now. Your thoughts on that, Megan? I want to make sure that
I think that we overcomplicate it.
Yeah.
If you just think about the purpose and everything that you do, you can relate it back to that purpose.
Yeah.
Am I doing this to glorify God? I'm folding laundry for my kids. Am I doing this to glorify God? Well, I'm caring for my children. I'm taking care of my children. So yes, I'm doing this and glorifying God. Am I doing it with a grumbling heart? Probably, but that's not, but it's still, I'm just giving that as an example of the smallest things to the biggest things, right? You don't have to create a nonprofit in your child's name to create purpose for what God wants you to do. It can be a conversation at a coffee shop with another mom who's struggling. Connecting with somebody is building that relationship and showing people Jesus in hard, dark, unfun times. Yes. And so I think when we really take the perspective and put it in, okay, this isn't God's plan, right? Because plan almost makes it feel like I have to tolerate it, yes. Right? I have to like this. I have to be okay with this. Yes. Versus purpose is okay, this is not fun. This is not enjoyable, but I'm doing it for the bigger picture. I think about athletes, right? Mm-hmm. Think about Super Bowl winning teams. I'm pretty sure that their whole purpose is to make it to the big game, to make it to the Super Bowl. But the plan is that you've got to run these sprints. You've got to do all these unfun things for the big purpose. And so I think you can take that same analogy when it comes to Christianity and our beliefs and having these challenging times on our journey of I'm doing this. It's not fun. It's painful. It's uncomfortable. But I'm doing it for the big purpose. I'm not doing it because it's part of the plan.
And the purpose is all about Him. And that's where it's real critical that we maintain that humility to say, you know what? I'm not here to serve myself every day. I'm here to serve Him. And along the way, I'm going to be blessed by that. I'm going to see things. I'm going to have joy that I'm not going to understand because I put Him first and myself second. And so I hope that if you're struggling on your faith journey like I was, I hope that you find at least something inspirational in what I just shared. And again, just like we talked during our autism segment, if these are questions that you have, I'd be happy to sit down and discuss them with you, pray with you. I just want to encourage you. There is a piece on the other side of this challenge that I think you'll find, and just recognize that God's going to use this in a way that you don't know right now. And it can be very amazing to you. It's just going to take some time to get there. And that's what I hope that you find. Our next segment is about family. So, I'll go off that very deep topic. Okay. And I should probably also say, I'm not a theologian here, people. Okay. But I want to talk a little bit about, because it's critical that we keep families together, right? And there's a lot of times there's conflict between husband and wife as you're going through this. And one of the concepts I wanted to talk about tonight is, are you on the same team? Because it's really important that you remind yourselves that your team, whatever your household name is, Julie and I have to go, hey, we are Team Golden. We're here to play for the group and not necessarily the individual. And the analogy I like to use is, it's when I was being trained in junior high and playing basketball, I was not an athlete or a star in basketball. Okay, I've got a 6-inch vertical, and that's about it. So I'm max out at that point. I have a body built for football, not for basketball. But I did that in tug of war. I'm pretty good at tug of war. Okay. But when I was being trained to play basketball, if there was ever a loose ball, you were trained to jump and go get that loose ball. And in the midst of all of that scrum, they would say sometimes you would have your hand on the ball and you're fighting for that ball, and the person that's across from you is fighting for that ball, and you find out you're on the same team. Well, if you continue to fight for that ball with that person, that ball can come loose and your opponent can get the ball. So they would try to make sure and tell you, somebody yell out same team as a reminder that you're playing for the same team. Because it didn't matter if you had the ball or they had the ball, as long as one of you had the ball, it's a win, right? One of the challenges that I think that couples have when they're dealing in these difficult times is you both have your hands on the ball. You're both trying to win the ball, and you don't realize that as long as one of you has the ball, you're winning. And that can be true with when you're trying to figure out treatment options. That can be true when you're trying to figure out plans for your children. That can be true when you're trying to figure out household finances. As long as one of you has the ball, you're winning. And you sometimes have to sit down again and say, hey, are we on the same team? Yes, we're on the same team. Let's go make sure that we've got the big picture in mind in all of this. So with that, one of the things that I would ask of you is maybe you've got conflict right now. Pick a conflict that you have. What's something you're fighting over, right? Pick any topic. I can apply this to any topic, okay? Pick a topic that you're fighting over, okay? Ask yourself, and sit down with your spouse, ask yourself, what's our big picture view of what this looks like? And if you both really sit down and walk through it, you're going to find that in just about 90% of the cases, you both have the same big picture goal in mind. It's just that you have very different ways that you think you ought to be able to get there. And it's those things that you have to negotiate. And sometimes you have to let go of the ball and let that other person have control of the ball. Sometimes you have to say, hey, I'm better at this than you are. Why don't you let me take the ball this time? But realize you're working for the same goal and same objective. And if you'll keep that in mind, a lot of those problems will resolve themselves. And if you married somebody that you can't agree with on big picture, that's not my fault. Okay? You picked them. Okay. And that's up to you to figure that out.
You picked your teammate. You're going to have to go back to the playground and no, I'm just kidding.
Better draft choice or choose somebody in free agency, but we won't talk about that. Okay.
Free agency you can't throw out the rest of the season to get the number one draft pick. That's not how that works.
That's it. What do you think, Megan? Have you seen that work?
Yes. And I think I love the analogy. You know me, I'm a sports girl. But I think that's an excellent analogy because when you think about a basketball team and you think about you've got your point guard, right? Your point guard is the main person that's going to determine how we're going to run this court on the offensive side.
Yes.
But sometimes when you go to defense, the point guard's not the go-to man. Maybe it's the guy under the basket because they've got a heavy game underneath the basket. And so figuring out, okay, who's going to be the point guard in this game while we're playing, who's going to navigate and what's my role? And sometimes your role is you're under the basket. Maybe you're rebounding. That's just as important. It's not the main job, but it's just as important. And so navigating, almost looking at each of those topics as a game and what's our game plan for this? And okay, Scott, you're going to be the point guard when we're looking at the finances and the insurance piece of it. Julie's going to be the point guard when we're looking at treatment and best options for providers for Colby's treatment.
Right.
So, and it ebbs and flows in seasons too, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm sure with that work, when you get super busy, Julie's got a little bit more time on and availability to hand the ball off to her and she navigates that for a bit. So I think it really just all boils down to, like you said, that communication and being on the same team.
And talking to each other on a regular basis. Maybe sit down on a weekly basis and say, what's our big picture? What is it that we're having conflict over? And let's see if there's some big picture things that can unite us in this, so we're not having squabbles over little things. Mm-hmm. We've got, and I think it's also important, another sports analogy, if you win the MVP, but your team doesn't go to the Super Bowl, Dak Prescott and the Dallas Cowboys, are you listening to me? if you win the MVP, but your team doesn't win the championship, your team is lost. And it's an empty victory. The goal has always got to get the team into the Super Bowl and win the game. So always be thinking team. Don't be thinking about you as the individual. Put the family first, okay? And if that happens, you'll always be a winner.
Scott, I think that's some really great advice, making sure that spouses are on the same page and kind of determining who's going to navigate what game plan and who's going to be in what position. So I know that you and Julie are going to be doing a class in January. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and maybe how that can help families through this navigating kind of some of our advice and recommendations?
Sure. And if you're listening or watching us in the Tarrant County or Dallas and Denton County area, may want to make a note of this. So my wife and I are instructors in the Prepare and Enrich Marriage Enrichment class. It's an 8-week program where we do a lot of identification of, how do you guys match up in your relationships? Where are the possible conflicts? And then making a plan of how can we address these conflicts so that we can have a better, more fulfilling marriage and put yourself in a position to be a better parent. We're going to be doing that specifically for families with special needs kids. It's going to be in the first quarter of 2024. It will be at the Hills Keller campus, and childcare for both your special needs kids and any other children will be available. It'll be about a 2-hour class. I think we have it scheduled for Tuesday nights, but it hasn't been firmed up completely. So if you have an interest and you feel like your relationship could benefit by spending some time working on those things where you may have some conflict, please, would be honored to have you as part of that class. Contact us. I'll be able to give you the information on that. And then I would like to also put a quick plug in for the Hills Church. We have 3 locations: Keller, North Richland Hills, and West Fort Worth. We have special needs ministers at all 3 of those locations. We want to serve your family, give you an opportunity to worship in peace, and we provide childcare for your special needs children on Sunday mornings. They have their own special class that's taught at a level that they're capable of. We also have respite nights once a month. We would love to be able to serve your family. If you'll contact me at the email, I'll see that we get you in contact with one of the ministers at the appropriate campus. Would love to have you be a part of that. And oh, by the way, we've got Christmas services coming up. So at most of those campuses, it may have been a long time since you've been able to attend a service with your special needs child. If you'll let us know, we'll try to make accommodations and be able to have you as part of one of our candlelight services at one of our 3 campuses. Megan, what have you got going on?
Scott, I'll actually add those details to our Facebook page at Autism Faith Family, and families can go there and gather more of those details. While they're there, they can also check out my Facebook page at hoppertconsulting.com, and then check out the website. I've got all kinds of different resources on there for families. I've got the top 10 questions for an ABA provider they can download. I've got an autism checklist. So if families are first receiving their diagnosis and they're not sure where to even start, they can download that. All of those are for free. Having the experience I have in this field, I've just found a lot of tools that parents don't have. So I'm trying to create those for families to make this journey a little bit less overwhelming as much as I can. So if you have enjoyed our podcast, please go back and listen to some of our previous recordings. We've had 2 interviews with some super autism moms that we've had the opportunity to share with and talk through. We've talked about insurance authorizations. We've talked about finding joy in the journey. And so we'd really encourage you to check out our previous episodes. So we appreciate you guys tuning in, and we are excited to talk with you guys and share more on our next episode.
Make sure and like us. If you would, hit that like button. Big issue for us. Comment if you don't mind. And again, if you know somebody else with a special needs child, take a moment and share this with them. Hopefully they may find something enriching out of it for them. So thanks everybody for joining us, and we will see you next time.